Historical Society. Um, we are very, very pleased to have you at the launch of our 2024 journal, our Platinum Journal. Um, Celebrates the way how our landscape and our people have developed to become the country that we are today as we know it. There are some wonderful intersections with our museum programming. So there's, for example, an article about the Irish in the Caribbean. And if you have not seen it as yet, when the launch is over, I invite you to pop over to the All Gallery. And there is a companion, coincidentally, a companion exhibition which explores that legacy of the Irish in the Caribbean. I'm not going to fuss and muss. We've got quite a few things to get through today's program. I think I neglected to introduce myself as usual. I am Kay Hall. I'm the Education and Community Outreach Officer here at the museum, and I am your sort of chair this morning. I'm going to beg your indulgence. I am going to chair sitting down in a chair because I have a small injury to my foot, but you will still be able to hear me as I invite people to the podium. So without further ado, I will introduce the director of our museum, Ms. Alessandra Cummins, to make a few welcome remarks. Thank you.
Of course, it likes to switch off as soon as I like to switch on. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. And welcome to you all. It's a pleasure to see so many faces and to welcome council members, members of the Museum Society, members of the public, members of the media, but perhaps the most important welcome is extended to our authors, their friends and family. Thank you very much for being with us this morning. For me, the most important aspect of the Museum Journal is not its longevity, though it has been in existence since November, nor its rarity, even as it remains one of the only local historical documentary productions in Barbados and indeed in the Anglophone Caribbean. More importantly, perhaps, it points to what Walter new knowledge formation emerging from the experiences, needs, and memories of the non-European world in contentious dialogue with 200 years of Western epistemic hegemony. How has this been achieved for us in the Caribbean and more specifically in Barbados? It is through the willingness and the determination of so many of our local researchers and writers and thinkers, not just academically oriented, but community focused, and not simply in the recounting of rarefied historicity, but in the recovery of hidden histories, some deliberately obscured, others unintentional omissions, which have been leading to the recognition that our identity as a people has been reformed and redefined in response to even recent 20th century and even more recent 21st century responses to our environment, our context, our being captured in the many offerings included in volume 70 of our 2024 issue of the journal, which you now have before you. And it is, frankly speaking, a bumper edition. As can be seen from the table of contents, we have come to this moment with this volume offering a huge bounty in the form of human experience within the Barbadian landscape and mindscape, as played out, as is pointed out, through changes to the Barbadian landscape occasioned by seminal moments in our history as an underlying theme of several of the articles in this iteration of the journal. More will be said about this presently by the journal's editor, by our chair of the Museums Council, by our chair of the Publications Committee, all of whom will be speaking this morning. But I wanted to take this moment to acknowledge that these changes in the landscape, in the villages and the venues, in the structures and the seascapes, in the history and the memory, in the locality and the diasporas, formed through spaces that have appeared and disappeared. These have all evolved and are evolving even as we speak as a result of human interactions and human agency with the land and with the people. And we look forward with anticipation to choose to utilize this knowledge for the betterment of humanity. Thank you very much for your attention.
At this time, I'd like to invite Professor Pedro Welch, the editor of our journal, to take the podium and just share a little bit with you about the vision for this year's pieces.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. It is certainly my pleasure to share a few thoughts on this year's journal. But before I get into that task, I wish to acknowledge, according to the protocols I think which have already been put in place, our president and our director, other members of the council. We also want to, while I stand here, share a word of encouragement to the former editor, Dr. Carol Watson, who is not very well. And we just want to ask you to keep him in your prayers or your best wishes. I'm also very happy to see a mentor, Professor Sir Woodville Marshall, who is largely responsible for my joining the university when I did, and in whose footsteps I've tried to follow over the years. And he is also a contributor, but I'm very happy to see him. And I also want to acknowledge the work of Tao Howard and Kaino, I think it's Kaino publishers, printers. Kay, we want to thank you very much as well too. And our director. You will have to sit at the feet of our director and listen to her as she picks up every missing comma, full stop. Even if after all that you still find one or two, you'll have to do that. But we've had a fairly tough journey to this point. We had hoped to have had the journal out a little earlier, but things work like that sometimes. Murphy's Law, as they might call it. This year's journal, like the other journals that we have had in the past, covers a potpourri of things Barbadiana and Caribbean as well. We have a number of articles which cover a wide spectrum of local and Caribbean history. But in the editorial, before we get into the various contributions, you'll find, excuse me, if you hear me, my throat, I have to clear my throat. It is not COVID. There is a little animal on the horizon called Sahara dust, and it's having its impact. But in the editorial, I've chosen to honor and call to mind the tremendous contribution of two Caribbean stalwarts, Sir Sridhar Ramphal, and also my own mother, late mother, Dame Maisie Barker Welch. I've chosen to include them in our editorial primarily because they represent in their lives a very important aspect of the history of our country and our region. So Sridhar was born in then British Guyana, to an Indian migrant who eventually became a minister of the Presbyterian Church, which is one of those quirks of Caribbean history that has not really been fully studied. His father was also a pioneer in terms of seeking rights for Asian women, Indian women in British Guyana, and a social activist in his own right. So Sridhar therefore comes out of that indentured immigrant background, which is very important in our understanding of Caribbean history. My own mother came out of a background of enslavement, in that her great-grandmother was an enslaved woman on the Asian plantation in St. John. And so like Sridhar Ramphal, she also represents a connection with a very important aspect of our Barbadian history. They both died in the same year, not too far from each other, but their contributions have been recognized by many others. Of course, in the case of my mother, I can say a lot more about her because I lived in the house with her for so many years. And I know her better than most, or knew her better than most. In the case of Sridhar Ramphal, he was very closely connected with the University of the West Indies for many years. And in that context that I know more of him, of course, his life extended beyond the university walls and into the entire Caribbean nation. I use Caribbean nation there as a preferred term. So that when you get a copy of the journal, as you will do, you will be advised to have a look at the accolades that are penned there about these two Caribbean heroes. One hero and the other heroine, Sridhar and Dame Maisie Barker Irene Welch. Incidentally, since again this is my mother I've written about, I knew her in ways that you would never have known her. I still recall one occasion when I got too big for my boots. And if you know anything about Barbadian history, when it comes to the correction of the young, she was relatively short, just a little over 5 feet or just under. I was never sure, because depending on what shoes she wore at any time, she could be 5'1.5", 5'1", or what it is. But I was a little bit, my mouth was a bit too loud. And she took her hand and she twisted my ear. And I think I've been listening to her ever since. I don't know if you know the old saying, hard days you won't hear, hard days you will feel. That was a Bajan punishment that worked wonders. And they complain about corporal punishment, but we who lived through that understood that it was a due sanction for having departed from the rules of life. Before I go a little further, also let me thank Sally Miller, who worked with us for so many years, and I'm very happy that she's passed on the baton. But I'm not happy that she's passed on the baton in the sense of passing it on, but that she's passed on a legacy of excellent work. So without any further ado, in the journal this year, we have another contributions. Let me share a bit with you. We have an article on villages in pre-emancipation Barbados by Sir Wilfrid Marshall. There are many villages, and you'll probably be aware of the book, I think, of Halls, Hills, and Holes. I'm always trying to remember to get the title right, which looks at Barbadian place names, Barbadian places. And this article is an excellent addition to that work, in that the article takes us through the history of Barbadian villages in that pre-emancipation period before we get into the post-emancipation period when villages become more structured. There are villages that we might not have known about before, and we certainly would not have known about their origins, but so Woodville has chosen to introduce us to a side of Barbados that is an integral part of our written and even our spoken history. There are places in Barbados, villages in Barbados that many of us, the names have changed. Things have changed over the historic period. I don't know, most of you remember, and this is not in the urban context, in the rural context, Penny Hole. Most of you know there is Penny Hole, which is now Jenswick. You would have heard of a place, Hallelujah Bottom. Don't ask me why they said that, but that's the name. And there are several other places in Barbados that we have only discovered more recently because Sir Woodville has chosen to highlight their existence and development. Following the contribution by Sir Woodville, there is an article penned by two contributors, Christina Welch, and I have no idea what is the connection to myself. I know for sure that the original name in the family would not have been Welch. It would have been some other thing. It might have been a name from the Akan or the Ashanti or the Kodamanti of Ghana. But Welch came into the picture at some point. And incidentally, some time ago, I wrote about an enslaved man who was brought from Africa to the Caribbean, and he was captured and then enslaved by a man called Welch. And I always wondered, why on earth did they give me that surname? But then I understood that my surname captures not only the negative side of our history, but it captures the heroic side. So let me claim that part. Because the Welches who followed that Welch the enslaver were Welches who also were resistors to enslavement. So that's where we were. So Christina Welch and Neil Finneran, and I see that name as an Irish name, even though I could be wrong on that. But they've written to us a commentary on work by Alexander Anderson, who visited Barbados and spent some time looking at the flora and fauna of the country. This is a very interesting article. It gives us an insight into the history of our country in the late 18th century. We also have a fairly large work here by a number of scholars entitled The World Heritage Site of Historic Bridgetown and its Garrison and Today's Challenges. It is penned and written by Michael Duval, Aegis Simmons, Janice Combats, Casey Allen, Rihanna Smith, Ariel Hinkson, Amanda Haynes, Alessandra Cummins, our own director, and Gordon Ashby. It is a tremendous contribution. It takes us into the important history of Bridgetown and many aspects of its current history as well. I don't know if you are aware that there was a time when Bridgetown was the most important port in the British Atlantic world. Yes, there were ports that might have been a little larger, but in terms, I've done a survey of the volume of trade passing through Bridgetown, identifying times when, especially during wartime, you might have as many as 500 ships at one time in the harbor here at Bridgetown. So this small spot in Barbados, known as Bridgetown, is part of the historic entry of Britain into this part of the world, and is also this little spot, Bridgetown, is obviously as well a point of study and investigation by these scholars who are identified here. Now, Brian Whiting, who has contributed an article on Rablan, particularly Rablan around Newton enslaved burial ground, is also offering to us a very important investigation a close look at another aspect of the history of Barbados, which has not been covered very well in the past, but certainly in this article, it is also timely because currently there's a lot of discussion about Newton ground, one of the few burial grounds that remain in the Western Hemisphere. So this is an article which I, again, like in the case of all the articles, I would say to you, they are must read. So to understand that. When I say must read for any one article, it's the same for all of the articles. Okay. Then following that, we have a contribution by Dan Campbell, and this is an interesting one. I've never attended this institution as a guest. I have attended as a visitor, Glendale Prison. I know that there's some, so Henry is here, who've looked at it and have seen another potential for it. But I'm quite aware that Glendale, there are many stories about Glendale. I used to visit Glendale myself, visiting persons in the condemned cells, as they were then called. Not a very pleasant experience, but Glendale has its own share of stories. There's a story of one person who was condemned to death, and who, on the occasion of that execution, they were singing hymns in the Glendale, and outside of the walls of Glendale, people could hear the hymns, and therefore they knew that something important was happening. That's not in this article. I've just shared that with you because I know enough about Glendale to share that little piece about the hymns being sung. But you should read this one as well too. It also includes a reference to a calypso about Glendale. And I said Glendale because you know that Barbadians have a way of inserting their own inflections into the pronunciation of various terms. So the calypso is about Glendale. And I'm hoping, I don't know if Diane could sing it for us, but or anybody else here, but there it is. We have a contribution following by Professor Cameron McCarthy. I knew him quite well because we were contemporaries at the university. And then he departed from Barbados. And later on, he became a professor in North America. And he has given us an article which is entitled, very intriguingly, Burnish Ornamentalism, Mechanisms of History and Visual Cultural Practices of Post-Colonial Elite Schools in Globalizing Circumstances. And in this article, there's a lot of discussion about the what we may call the themes of elitism and cultural practice as evidence in these various schools that the author describes. No, I'm not an artist. I leave that to Alessandra. But this article follows on history and memory, the sublime and Caribbean landscapes, deals with several beautiful aspects of Barbados visual history, as covered in art, the various kinds of art. As I was going through the article myself, as I was editing the journal, I had to familiarize myself with some aspects of Barbadian art so that I could come to grips with what I call the peculiarities of the artistic jargon as used by the author. But it's a very fascinating article again. There's a small article, it's just small, not less in its importance, but on the Joseph Leider and the Leider Trust property by Mary Claire Leider. Leider is not an unknown Barbadian name, not a common Barbadian name, but it's fairly well known. There used to be, I think there used to be a Methodist minister, Reverend Leider, here in Barbados at one time, and probably some relative. But this looks at the Leider Trust property, and it's another aspect of our history that is often not covered. Here you have a situation where property is left, property is bequeathed, And in the bequest of that property, you have some very important, what they call cultural and historical moments, which emerge in the article as well. Excuse me. Where it is, where it is. But Culpeper Island is a rock. But when I was at school, we were always told that an island is a piece of land. We may be driving on, driving on areas that used to be part of the sea, and which of the graphics of location, etc. Now, there's a name that appears in the next contribution. That's the author, Benjamin John Hoyos. Now, Hoyos is not quintessentially a Barbadian name, but it has become one. In that Hoyos is really a name that comes to us out of South America. Comes here, and then eventually is a name that we know as we look at the question of the history of Barbados. Because the modern histories of Barbados, the first modern histories of Barbados, were written by Hoyos, Fab Hoyos, as we used to call him. And I understand there's a connection here. But there's a look at the Ireland and Barbados aspects of the history of two islands. I visited Ireland several years ago, landed on a geese boat. I don't know how many of you know what the geese boats were. They used to be banana boats that would sail between the Caribbean and Britain. And I traveled from here to St. Lucia, and got on by plane first, and then got into the ship at Viewfort, and then sailed across the Atlantic Ocean in the geese boat. There were two geese boats at the time, the Boonstal and the Boonsberg were two geese boats. When we landed in Ireland, what struck me more than anything else is that when I stepped off the ship, after overcoming the tendency to rock with the land, because over the years you got accustomed to the movement of the ship, I landed there as a Afro-Barbadian. Absolutely surprised that some young children were there begging for a halfpenny. I hadn't conceptualized an Ireland like that. In other words, for me, as an Afro-Barbadian, knowing our own history, I would have looked at Ireland as just another land of Europeans, but not a land of Europeans who had their own story of poverty and almost enslavement. So Ireland, I was intrigued then about this Ireland, and certainly and the way how that history of that country, that Ireland, touches Barbados. So another article worth your read. Now, as we come to the end of the work, we have a preview and this is a preview placed there in the journal primarily so that we can get a sense of some of the work that has been engaged in by some of our contributors. In this case, Joseph Howard is a researcher who's looked at the families, and in particular, in his genealogical research, he's looked at the Buckley-Ritter families of Barbados and Maryland. So very interesting, has a lot of interesting little bits and pieces. All of it will not necessarily be relevant to your Barbadian experience, but there's a lot in here that from which you can pick out and pull out some very important aspects of our Barbadian history. Then we have some book reviews which are written, given to us by Alessandra Cummins and also by Kay Hall. So that is what you have this year. Again, I wish to thank those who have contributed. We see we have space. I understand the time is limited, but if any of the authors who are here are present, I'm sure that they will not mind saying a few word or two. So we are open to that. Is that where we are?
Yes, it is.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, my pleasure. Thank you.
This is a relatively new part of our journal launch program, but we've had one or two people say that it would not be a bad idea to give those authors present, if they wanted to take that opportunity, the chance to say a few words about what they've written or being a part of this journal experience. So at this time, if any of the authors here present would like to say a few words, now is your moment. Everyone's going to be shy. Well, there is another opportunity to speak with them one-on-one if they're going to be shy. I understand that the camera can be a little daunting. So if no one wants to take advantage of that particular opportunity at this time, we will invite Dr. Henderson Carter, the chair of our Publications and Public Programming Committee, to say a few words.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. It is really a beautiful morning, the last day of the year, where we gather here to launch this very special piece of work, our 70th edition of the Journal of Barbados and Museum and Historical Society. I wish to congratulate Professor Welch for his tireless work, his tireless devotion to duty, and he's been working on this for the entire year. And Professor Welch, I want to thank you. Let's give him a round of applause. As well as his team, because he worked with a team to go through and to ensure that we have a good piece of work. I also wish to congratulate our authors. Some of them are here. I think Sir Woodville is here. Sir Woodville, take a bow. Thank you so much. Give him a round of applause. Kelman and Hoyas, can I see you? Kelman and Hoyas, yes, Kelman, yes. Give him a round of applause. And Hoyas as well as Diane Campbell. Diane, please stand. Yes, another person? We want to thank you for coming, and we want to thank you for writing. I think it is a very important thing to do, to write. I want to say also special kudos to the museum for producing this journal for over 70 years. Sometimes we in this country, we start something and we stop. But imagine this. We've been producing this journal, and a quality journal too, for over 70 years, and it's getting better. And of course, I'm sure that in the next few years, it will get even better. Thank you, museum. Thank you, Ms. Cummins, and your team. Let's give them a round of applause. This journal represents the production of knowledge for nation building. Just not knowledge for knowledge's sake, but knowledge for the building out of our nation, for the development of our nation. I like to think of it as contributing to the knowledge economy, Professor Justin, the knowledge economy or the knowledge society. And it does so in several ways. First of all, we have an article on Pelican Island, which is no more. But they're now trying to revive the Pelican experience if you were to go down the Harbor Road during the night. But this journal provides the ammunition for us to create pamphlets, to create stories on Pelican Island, stories that can enhance the overall project. In addition, so Woodville's piece on villages should be read by tour operators, by taxi men, so that they can give little pieces of information to visitors when they come. But not only to visitors, to villagers themselves who live in these villages but don't know the origin of these villages. And that is why I commend this journal to everybody. And now there's an article on Glenderry. I'm looking forward to reading this article, Diane. And Glenderry, in my view, is or should be transformed into a heritage site. And Alcatraz of Barbados, and I'm sure that Professor Fraser in the back would agree with me. But we have left it to rot. We've left it for the grass and the bush to overtake it. But why not develop the place and tell these stories? I have a personal story of myself, not that I'd be the inmate of the place, but of a story of some Germans who were incarcerated there during the First World War, who were apparently digging a tunnel to get out. These are stories that we ought to tell, and this is how we can create a knowledge economy and a knowledge society using the journal and, of course, other books. If you were to look around, a plethora of books where we can get information. There's Professor Fraser's book, Did You Know, Volume 1 and 2. And every year somebody is writing something. This is how we create a knowledge society, a knowledge economy to build our nation. So I have two recommendations. First, I urge people to read. I want to urge people, Barbadians, to read. I am seeing too much drinking. If I were to walk around this place, drive around this place, Barbadians are drinking. But I want to see more reading. Barbadians sitting under the tree, sitting at the beach, reading, rather than drinking. And I want politicians to read. I want, yes. Yes. This is how we build our nation. Because if you read and you read the past, and you see the pitfalls of the past, you could avoid those pitfalls. But not only that, you get a sense of how the present has been created and what is likely in the future. I want social commentators to read. People who go on brass stats every morning. I want them to read. So when they come with knowledge. They come to inform, not to scare. Even economists. I want economists to read. I want entrepreneurs to read, including our taxi operators, civil servants to read, not just to push files on paper, but to read. I want families to read, children to read, because knowledge is power. So my view here, therefore, as we go into the year 2025, let us become a reading society rather than a drinking society. Thank you. Secondly, I want to encourage people to write. Yes, write for the journal. Contact Professor Welch if you have an article in mind. We need journal articles. Write for the newspapers. But more than that, write your memoirs. I am sure that all of us here have all sorts of experiences that we can share to help the society, to help others who are coming after us, business persons. Write your memoirs so that our young businessmen and women can get some understanding of the business landscape. People benefit from your story. People benefit from your experiences. I am sure that everybody, or most people in here, read Dear Christine in the newspapers because we want to benefit from those experiences. Don't we not? We don't? But there's some experiences and there's some things that you see that you're also going through. And perhaps that can be a benefit too. But the point is, let us write. Let us be a writing society. So I want to thank you so much, Museum. Thank you so much, Professor Welch, and contributors for helping us to build out our knowledge economy.
Thank you.
I feel that as an employee of an institution which just launched a RUM, I must contradict the chair of my publications and public programming committee. I think that is a lovely way to spend an evening, to relax perhaps on your patio with your journal in hand, and a little sip of our Garrison grog.
That's a compromise.
Anyway, the next part of our program is going to be the remarks of the president of our council, the president of the museum, Professor Justin Robinson. Please welcome him to the podium.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I volunteer to drink and read.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. Feels very familiar here. You could almost have a UWI staff meeting along with me. And I'm always happy to see Maureen and Sir Henry, because as a financial economist, I always feel a little bit like a Philistine in the midst of all the historians. So Maureen, I'm thankful for your company as a businesswoman. But certainly a pleasure. So ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, lovers of history, and guardians of Barbadian heritage, it is with immense pride and even greater curiosity that as we enter the 25th year of the 21st century, that we launch volume 70 of the Journal of the Barbados Museum and Historical Society. This edition is not just another publication. I see it as a time machine, a mirror, and a map all rolled into one. It is a testament to the depths of our island's history, its story, and its connection to the wider world. In the pages of this journal, we revisit the resilient villages of pre-emancipation Barbados and how their names have evolved over time. We explore the complex relationship between Barbados and Ireland, a historical tapestry woven with threads of migration, labor, and intertwined destinies. We also walk across the fields of Rabland, reclaiming spaces that carry lessons about sustainability, resilience, and our enduring bond with the earth, captured really in the journey to the Newton burial ground, where geography meets memory, uncovering a landscape that speaks volume about our ancestors' lives and their legacies. But this journal is more than a collection of articles. It is a reminder that our history isn't a thing of the past. It is alive, teaching us, challenging us, and guiding us forward. Whether it's a forgotten hero, a cultural gem, or a lesson still shaping our society, these stories in this journal are vibrant threads in the tapestry of who we are as Barbadians and West Indians. As you leaf through these pages, I hope you're inspired to see history not as something behind us, but as something calling us forward. If history is indeed written by the victors, let this journal remind us that Barbados is a champion in the art of storytelling. I want to offer my warmest congratulations to the editorial team, the contributors, and everyone who worked to make this journal a bridge between our past and our future. Let us continue to honor these stories, for in doing so, we honor ourselves. So here's to preserving, exploring, and celebrating our heritage. History never rests, and neither should we. We plan to take the journal forward. One of our major projects in the upcoming year is to have the journal indexed, because we now live in a world where things like citations and being tagged in Google Scholar matter a lot, so that's a major project for us. So again, I want to thank you for coming out. I want to commend the team and continue to support the museum and our work. And all the best for 2025. Thank you.
At this time, we're going to invite Ms. Chantal Thomas, our development officer, to just thank a few of the persons who have helped us to get here today.
Madam Chair, may I just interject for a moment, because what Dr. Carter said is so important. And I'd just like to add something very, very quickly. First of all, the issue of Glenderry Prison, it is really a tragedy that it has not been dealt with. In 2012, I went, like Professor Welch, I went to Ireland in 2012. And I was so impressed by Kilmainham Prison. I explored 4 prisons in Britain and I wrote a 25-page proposal to the government, which now rests in the circular bin in Barbados Tourism Investment Inc. It took me 5 years of canvassing to get the last government to agree what they said would have to be done to decommission the prison. There are more than 100 prison museums around the world, and wherever they are the top attraction in that city, in that place, from Robbins Island to Alcatraz, which was mentioned. And it is an absolute shame that Glengarry Prison, which was only about 7% damaged by the fire, the most magnificent building in Barbados, is there, with only the central stair hall and the rooms behind it damaged. Only 1 block of 5 in the women's section damaged, and the dining area, about 7% by my calculation. I've been into that prison many times, not as a convict, but in fact conducted guided tours. And the day that the prison was decommissioned with a function organized by the government, they didn't really invite anybody. Miss Cummins wasn't there. None of the historians were invited. Nobody. It was a performance given and a speech by me and a few other things. And that was in 2017. By my calculation, that's 7 years ago. It is now 19 years since the prison had its fire, and it's growing bush and trees. And it could be a unique tourist attraction. My proposal said, put it out to tender. The government will spend nothing except a few hours preparing a tender document, because there were 2 private sectors that were desperate to get a hold of it, because with very little expenditure to create a museum area and to clean up the prison, it would be a magnificent site, the only one in the Caribbean. And we are sitting on a gold mine, which is a real shame. But on the other point that Dr. Carter mentioned, this is so important, not just the reading and the writing, but the marketing of the Museum Journal. When I wrote a column, for 20 odd years, I have promoted the Museum Journal every year when it's published and reviewed it. And the newspapers, for some reason, don't like doing book reviews anymore. It's very hard to get a book review done. So it needs some other method of marketing. But I will promise, Alessandra, that I will contact both of the editors of both journals and submit my review next week.
Thank you. Thank you.
This way. Thank you, Professor Fraser. As Kay said, I am the Development Officer of the Barbados Museum, Chantal Thomas. And I don't speak loud enough. Professor Robinson, members of council, all our guests here this morning, it is my pleasure to propose a vote of thanks expressing our gratitude to all involved in this exciting journey of the 2024 publication of the Journal of the Barbados Museum and Historical Society. A big thank you to all the authors and contributors this year to the journal who bring our history alive through their articles. You're instrumental in making this publication a reality and encouraging us to read, of course. I would like to extend a sincere thanks and utmost gratitude to our valued sponsors. Without your generous support, we are unable to publish this journal and make these stories possible. Without hesitation, you've collaborated with us in the dissemination of history and heritage of Barbados. We look forward to continuing this partnership in the future. And I'll mention some of our supporters: Chancery Chambers, Harris Paints Limited, Goddard's Enterprises, Consumers Guarantee Insurance, TMR Sales and Services, St. Nicholas Abbey, Carter's General Store, West Indies Rum Distillery, Oran Limited, Foursquare Distillery, Southpaw Graphics, Clyde P. Jones Funeral Home Limited, Sums Limited, known to most of us as Sewing World, Protege Computer Services, Garrison Grog, we all know who they are, Miller Publishing Limited, and let us not forget Cop Printery. We thank COT for delivering this beautiful journal this year. We acknowledge the tireless work of our editorial team, led by our editor, Professor Pedro Welch, who acknowledged earlier the work of members of the team, especially our layout designer, Tao Edward, education officer, Ms. Kay Hall, sorry that you're wounded, who looked over after logistics, and everyone behind the scenes who ensured that every detail was perfect. Your dedication and expertise have brought this publication to life in a way that surpasses all expectations. I can't imagine what next year is going to be. We extend a very hearty vote of thanks to all of our speakers this morning. Thank you for your kind and supportive sentiments, including we don't need to drink, but we need to read. We're going to try that. I think Garrison Grog allows us to sit and read and sip. The media members of the media who are here with us this morning, thank you for being here and offering your support through sharing the information of this event. Our museum team, we can never do it without banding together all our departments to perform a production. Coordinating the logistics and the setup involved in this morning's production, we thank all our team members. Last but certainly not least, a heartfelt thanks to all of you who are in our audience this morning for being here and for your ongoing interest in the work of the Barbados Museum. Your encouragement and engagement are what makes this journey worthwhile. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being here. I wish all of you a healthy, prosperous, and wonderful 2025.
Thank you, Cynthia.
You're welcome.